You apply for a job. The pay is incredible. The work is vague. International affairs consultant, senior analyst. But the recruiter seems polished, professional, real. They send a contract, a confidentiality agreement. Everything about it looks legitimate, except the company doesn't exist. The recruiter isn't human, or if they are, they're not who their profile says they are. And the people behind it aren't trying to hire you. They're trying to turn you into a spy. This isn't a movie plot. This happened, right now, on American soil, to people who once held the nation's most sensitive secrets. And in June 2026, the FBI and the Department of Justice moved to shut it down. 13 websites, one sprawling operation, a foreign intelligence service hiding behind fake consulting firms, AI-generated faces, and job postings designed to look like nothing more than LinkedIn opportunities. This is the story of how it was built and how it was taken apart. To understand why this operation was so dangerous, you have to understand who it was aimed at. Not random citizens, not low-level employees. The operation specifically hunted for current and former U.S. security clearance holders, people who had once worked inside the machinery of American national security, military personnel, federal employees, analysts who had signed their names to non-disclosure agreements promising to protect classified information for the rest of their lives. These are people trained to recognize manipulation, people who've sat through counterintelligence briefings, people who, in theory, should be the hardest targets in the country to recruit. And that's exactly why the operation had to be sophisticated. According to the Justice Department, the scheme used fabricated and stolen identities, paired with AI-generated profile photos, to construct consulting companies that looked entirely legitimate. Polished websites, professional branding, job titles like senior analyst and international affairs consultant, vague enough to apply to almost anyone with a security background, specific enough to sound real. If you'd stumbled onto one of these sites cold, there's a good chance you wouldn't have blinked twice. That was the point. Here's how the trap worked. A target, say a former intelligence analyst or a retired government contractor with a security clearance, gets a message. Maybe on a professional networking site, maybe through an email that recruiter outreach. The message offers a consulting opportunity, good pay, flexible hours, internationally based but remote friendly. The recruiter seems credible. They have a LinkedIn profile, a headshot, a title. Except investigators now believe many of these profiles were partially or entirely AI-generated. Faces that don't belong to real people, identities built specifically for this operation. Once a target engages, the recruiters move fast. They offer a contract, a confidentiality agreement. On paper, it looks like standard corporate onboarding, the kind of paperwork any consulting gig might require. But buried inside that consulting work was the real ask: share information, insider information, reports and details tied to the target's former government role, the exact kind of material they were legally and ethically obligated to protect. And to sweeten the deal, prosecutors say the operation offered direct payment in exchange for sensitive information, money wired through online payment platforms, deliberately structured to obscure where it was really coming from. Some targets, according to investigators, were pressured even after initial hesitation. The recruiters leaned on the legitimacy of the fake contracts, the professionalism of the website, the appearance of a real company. Anything to keep the target engaged long enough to extract something useful. This is what modern espionage looks like, not trench coats and dead drops. Spreadsheets, shell companies, and a well-designed website. The Justice Department has been careful in how it characterizes the operation. Officials describe the individuals involved as suspected Chinese agents, tied to Beijing's intelligence apparatus, though the alleged conspirators have publicly denied any connection to a foreign government. FBI officials, however, didn't hold back on what they believe was happening. Assistant Director Roman Rojavsky, who leads the FBI's Counterintelligence and Espionage Division, said the fake consulting domains show how far Chinese intelligence services are willing to go, leaning on AI-generated content to trick, recruit, or coerce former security clearance holders into handing over sensitive information. According to Rojavsky, this isn't an isolated tactic. The FBI says it has watched Chinese intelligence services increasingly turn to artificial intelligence, professional networking platforms, and online payment systems as tools for targeting Americans. An evolution in tradecraft that blends Silicon Valley technology with Cold War-era recruitment goals. In Washington, FBI Special Agent in Charge Daniel Wierzbicki put it even more bluntly. For years, the Chinese government has tried to exploit U.S. government employees by hiding behind fake companies and phony job postings. This operation, he said, was just the latest version of that playbook. So how do you dismantle an operation like this? You don't raid a building. You don't arrest someone at an airport. You go after the infrastructure itself, the websites, the domains, the digital storefronts that make the entire scheme function. That's exactly what happened. Federal authorities seized all 13 internet domains tied to the operation, effectively shutting down every fake consulting site connected to the scheme in a single coordinated action. U.S. Attorney Janine Ferris-Pirro, announcing the seizures, said the message was simple. Any attempt to exploit Americans entrusted with sensitive information would be exposed and dismantled. She credited the operation's success to sustained work from federal prosecutors and law enforcement partners, work that, by its nature, often takes months or years to fully unravel before a single domain is seized. Assistant Attorney General John Eisenberg, who oversees the Justice Department's National Security Division, framed the seizures as a warning sign for the public. According to Eisenberg, these kinds of operations succeed by dangling the promise of easy money in front of people who might be persuaded to reveal something they swore to protect. And he urged anyone approached online with vague, well-paid consulting offers to treat the outreach with serious caution. That warning matters, because this wasn't a one-time scam targeting a handful of people. This was infrastructure, a network of fake companies built to run indefinitely, recruiting target after target for as long as it stayed undetected. Now, all 13 domains are gone. The websites that once looked like ordinary consulting firms now redirect to a seizure notice from the United States government. And this case didn't happen in isolation. It landed the same week the U.S. Treasury Department formally blacklisted several of China's top high-tech companies. A separate but parallel sign of just how strained the technological and intelligence relationship between Washington and Beijing has become. And it's not the only counterintelligence case making headlines this year. Just weeks earlier, an American citizen who had been living and working in China pleaded guilty to acting as an agent of the Chinese government inside the United States. A separate prosecution, but part of the same broader pattern federal investigators say they're seeing more and more often. Even as diplomatic optics suggest improving relations, leaders from both countries publicly emphasizing cooperation after recent meetings. The intelligence services on both sides are, by all appearances, operating on a completely different track. Public diplomacy on one level, quiet, relentless espionage on another. That contradiction is part of what makes cases like this one so important to understand. The handshake in front of cameras doesn't mean the recruitment attempts stop. If anything, officials suggest they're increasing, just becoming harder to detect, thanks to tools like AI-generated personas that didn't exist a decade ago. Here's the uncomfortable truth this case reveals. You don't need to work in the CIA or the Pentagon to be a target. You just need to have once had access to something valuable, and a profile that's visible online. Security clearance holders, current or former, are now navigating a recruitment landscape where the recruiter on the other end of a message might not be a real person at all, where the company reaching out might be a website built specifically and only to extract information from people like them. Federal officials say the warning signs are often there, if you know to look for them. Vague job descriptions that never quite explain what the work actually involves. Pressure to sign confidentiality agreements before any real details are shared. Requests, gentle at first, then more direct, for information tied to a previous government role. And payment offers that feel disproportionate to the consulting being described. The FBI's message, echoed across nearly every official statement on this case, was consistent. The Bureau will continue using every tool available to identify and dismantle these networks before they can do lasting damage to national security. A consulting job that doesn't exist. A recruiter who might not be human. A contract designed not to hire you, but to compromise you. This is what 21st century espionage looks like. Quiet, digital, and built to look exactly like opportunity. The FBI calls it a win. The Justice Department calls it a warning. And for 13 websites that once looked like ordinary businesses, the only thing left now is a federal seizure notice. If this case opened your eyes to how modern intelligence operations actually work, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more of these stories coming and you won't want to miss them. Drop a comment below. Would you have spotted the red flags? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.